Humanity seeks to see infinity. Humanity seeks to see the stars. Humanity seeks to know the truth. Humanity seeks to feel transcendence. Humanity seeks to reach the heavens. Humanity seeks to see beauty. Epilogue. We see Galileo now near the end of his life in 1642. He is 77 years old. His final days were not dark, although he did become completely blind. His son came often to care for him and to assist him with his newest invention, the pendulum clock. A brilliant and devoted former student is given permission to visit. He aids Galileo's writings and discourse. Together, they're working on a new book about mathematical ratios. A teenage boy named Viviani becomes Galileo's live-in companion, student, and disciple. To Viviani, Galileo opens up and retells the stories of his youth, the developments of his early ideas. Viviani becomes a prominent mathematician, but also an important biographer of Galileo, helping to preserve the legacy of the great man for generations to come. Galileo always had some friends among the clergy. He always considered himself to be a devout Catholic. He petitioned the Church Fathers and, in his final years, was given permission to attend Mass on high holy days. Galileo's final book, Discourses on Two New Sciences, was uncensored, published in Holland. It's considered his greatest accomplishment, the foundation of modern physics and material science. Upon Galileo's death, the Vatican librarian wrote this tribute to him. Now, envy ceasing, the sublimity of that intellect will begin to be known, which will serve all posterity as guide in the search for truth. We say goodbye to Galileo with a song. Surrender your pride, surrender your wit, cold, clear winter nights, quietly moonlit. Surrender your knowledge of how the heavens go. Surrender your thoughts, your bravissimo. Surrender your friends, surrender your foes, all your obsessions, passions that you chose. Surrender the sword you tried to bury to the hilt, pools of innocence, rivers of guilt. Surrender your sight, surrender the chase, exquisite beauty of infinite outer space. Lay down your poetry, you no longer need to rhyme. Surrender to the forces of time. Welcome. This is Galileo Revisited. It begins in Venice in the year 1564. Two men are standing on a rooftop, gazing up at the dark night sky, and one of them says, "Come, look in this direction. There, streaks of light, a cascade of stars. They seem to be racing across the sky." And the other one says, "I've heard of such, but this is the first I see for myself. Falling stars, an omen of some kind." They discuss the nature of the universe, how the crystal spheres hold everything in place, a fixed framework of infinite perfection. And yet some stars do wander. The sun, the moon, Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn. They've been told the math is complicated, but that Aristotle and Ptolemy assure us that the wandering stars are not actually cracking the crystal heavens. One by one, local residents come out of their homes into the street to admire the moon and the stars. They discuss what they believe to be true, that Earth is full of chaos because humanity has sinned. But the heavens are the domain of God. The heavens are divine perfection. The moon is a perfect pearl, and in the middle of the swirling motions of the heavens, the earth stands still. They say heaven's above, hell's below. That's all that we need to know. They're concerned with how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. A citizen of Venice sings. I believe 'cause I've been told that Earth, this domicile, is at the center of the universe and that the earth stands still. But on this earth you'll find chaos, hunger, need, deception, greed. Nature's sometimes pitiful, it's a wonder we survive at all. Find comfort in the stars. Find comfort in the stars, for that's where heaven dwells. The crystal spheres hold things in place, the moon's a perfect pearl. I believe God's omnipotence when I can just see the evidence. Perfection I can ponder, though some stars do like to wander. I believe 'cause I've been told heaven's above, hell's below. I believe 'cause I've been told that's all that I need to know. I believe 'cause I've been told heaven's above, hell's below. I believe 'cause I've been told that's all that I need to know. And one by one they return to their homes, and their candlelights go dark. It is the same night in 1564 in the small town of Pisa. We meet Vincenzo Galilei, Galileo's father. Vincenzo is a trailblazing musician and composer who, in a few years, will publish a controversial book of music theory that significantly breaks with the past. He's a scientist, an acoustic scientist, who performs experiments on acoustic strings using mathematics. Vincenzo is also gazing out at the dark night sky. Falling stars, an omen of some kind. When a midwife enters the room with a baby in her arms. Your firstborn is a boy. What should his name be? Galileo. Galileo Galilei, after his great ancestor, the famous nobleman and doctor of Florence over 100 years ago. It is an old name, a revered name. Time passes, the child grows older. Come, son, it's time for your lute lessons. Galileo excels at playing the lute. Time passes, the child grows older. Father, look at my paintings and drawings. Galileo excels at art. Time passes, the child grows older. Come, son, it's time for you to go to college now and become a doctor. Are you doing well in your astrology class? Yes, Father, I can draw your horoscope, but I don't want to become a doctor. I found a book by Euclid called Geometry. I want to become a mathematician. Oh, how will you ever support yourself? I wanted you to become a doctor. But Galileo goes to college. He becomes a brilliant mathematician, and he's able to assist his father with his acoustic mathematical experiments. Galileo explains, some people say that I'm so original, that I cracked the code of science. But you should have met my father, and but the cub of a lion, he wrote a controversial book, just like me, and he made enemies. He's the one who taught me these very words, that knowledge by authority alone is absurd. By stretching the strings, he discovered new things, using math to explain what he heard. He broke with the past, made his old teachers mad, but in this he and I concurred, that knowledge by authority alone is absurd. Should knowledge be accepted only on faith, subject to polite or circuitous debate? Vincenzo showed me how knowledge made sense if you properly set up your experiments. Those experiments he called a search for truth. The ideals he gave me strengthened my pursuits. Time passes again. It is 1610. We're in the fine, pink palace of Venice, the home of Gianfrancesco Segredo, Galileo's dearest friend. Galileo's 46 years old. He's not in attendance at this party, although most of the guests are friends or patrons of Galileo's. For example, General Del Monte, a patron, Paolo Sarpi, the brilliant and influential Venetian statesman and theological counselor to the Doge, and various intellectuals, a student of Master Galileo, a humanist historian, a glassblower from Murano, a poet, an artist. It's quite a party. The wine has been flowing, tongues are getting loose. There are two among the guests, unknown to the others, two Jesuit priests visiting from Rome. Segredo and the student are laughing about a prank that Master Galileo made to embarrass another university professor. Galileo wrote a letter feigning to be an amateur mathematician and posing a particularly devilish problem, to which the professor answered quickly but incorrectly. Many in the room laugh. Overhearing this, the Jesuit priests are disturbed. This prank was meant to embarrass the professor, but instead it exposes the egotistical and malicious core of Galileo. His vanity is well known, even in Rome. Galileo has contempt for noble reputations. He cares not even for his own reputation. Has your man Galileo fathered 3 bastard children with his Venetian madam? What kind of reputation can such a man boast? Sarpi intervenes. Ah, brothers, forgive our man Galileo his eccentricities and passions, for he is a free man. If you have a point to argue with him, well, let us fetch him and bring him to you, for we find his brilliant arguments exceedingly delightful. Galileo's friends don't stop there. Now they're talking about his brilliant discoveries, another astonishing invention, a proof he's working on. He's a wonderful professor. Sarpi asks, who among the Jesuit priests could be recommended as his equal? Your challenge poses no threat to us. We need not name his equal or better. Galileo's success will simply be cursed if he fails to make a few more friends in the church. With this hiss of the snake, they take their leave. Sarpi and the general exit, discussing the political tensions between Venice and Rome. It's late in the afternoon. The 5 young men are getting hungry. They decide to get a meal together. Perhaps they would be welcome nearby across the water in Padua, at the home of Galileo. Segredo, left alone in his fine pink palace, steps out on the balcony, is embraced by the twilight of Venice, and gazes up as the moon begins to rise. It is the same night across the water in Padua at the home of Galileo. The 5 young men have been welcomed and fed, and now Galileo asks, would they like to see his new spyglass? They notice it's a crafty-looking object. They ask him how he came to possess it. News came from the Netherlands of the invention of the spyglass. Sarpi says he told me in the spring, but I forgot. Then we learned that a man was coming to present a spyglass to the Doge of Venice. Sarpi held him back. He gave me 2 weeks to invent a better spyglass, and 2 weeks later I was ready. My presentation to the Doge, to the rooftops we climbed. On horizon we saw distant ships. On the other side of Venice, we saw women walking up church steps. We could read the church inscription overhead. I recognized that the spyglass could be useful for generals to see their soldiers at war or merchants to watch for their ships at sea. Ooh, this novelty should make you a fortune. Generals and merchants pay well. I would not decline a lucrative opportunity, but I set my sights on something grander. I went back to my workshop, spent several months improving my spyglass. What you see here is something much more. With this telescope, I see the stars and the heavens. I see the face of God. Ooh, the face of God. What exactly have you seen? I've seen the craggy surface of the moon with mountains, valleys, craters, light and shadow. I've seen 4 moons of Jupiter locked in an elliptical orbit. Could it be an elliptical orbit like the Earth and the Sun? And Venus, let me tell you this, Venus has phases. Well, if Venus has phases, it can't be a star. Could it be like the moon, reflecting the light of the sun? And there are many more stars than the eye can see. The distance of those stars and enormity of all mankind. I have been the first to gaze into infinity. You've passed through the crystal spheres. You're leaving behind the ancient astronomers, Aristotle and Ptolemy. Indeed, and I tell you this, through the telescope, I've come to believe Copernicus. The cosmos follows mathematical rules. The sun is at the center, the earth moves. "10 years have passed," Galileo explains. What was I to think after the telescope, after my discoveries in astronomy, after the crisis of 1616, when I was admonished and sternly cautioned by the Roman Inquisition? What was I to think in 1620, when I was shown a poem written about me by none other than the powerful and ambitious Cardinal Barberini? By your art, O Galileo. You're so smart, Galileo. With the glass you made so fine, you've seen the light divine. It sounds better in Italian. Well, 3 years later, I found reason to hope, for Barberini, the poet, became the Pope. I see the time approaching when science cannot be silenced. I see the time approaching when the temple might crack. Jesuit and Dominican priests say I've trashed their scientific careers, but science requires thinking that they lack. I see the church like a ship on a troubled sea, sailing toward disaster. Who better than me to come to her aid? I, the best debater, to explain and to persuade. I still have some friends among the clergy and powerful friends back home. Perhaps I can explain my discovery now that I've been called to Rome. I know not how this may end. Perhaps the poet Pope is still my friend. It is 1633. We are in a giant library in Rome. Galileo is now 69 years old. He's not in attendance in this room, for he is held in a prison cell below. A formal procedure is about to begin. The participants are still milling about before they take their seats. Cardinals, most of them, others Jesuit priests. Some of these priests are now famous for their extreme loyalty to the post-Reformation state. Some of these cardinals are feared, revered, for their willingness to order abduction, torture, and even murder to preserve the spirit of the kingdom of knowledge held in that room, that library. We're about to witness today's proceedings of the Roman Inquisition. You notice it's a library with many books. It's been over 150 years since the invention of the printing press. Books once printed only in Latin can now be found in many languages. And a priest says, including scientific books written in Italian by the impertinent Galileo. Art can be reproduced, published in a book, enjoyed by everyone. And a priest says, including drawings of the imperfect surface of the moon, published by the impertinent Galileo. Theology, once the ivory tower from which the Catholic Church ruled most of Western mankind, can now be read in the Bible and discussed by commoners in conversation in any coffee shop. And a priest says, you will find theological arguments in the pathetic letters of the impertinent Galileo. And here is the subject of today's discussion. Galileo's recently published tome, Dialogue on the Two Chief World Systems, Ptolemaic and Copernican. They all take their seats. The room is still in turmoil. The chief inquisitor enters. This inquiry seeks to reverse the recent judgment that gave permission to Galileo to publish his dialogue on the two chief world systems. Galileo has enemies in Rome. Their objections to the book have reached the ears of the Pope. No, it is not too late for us to intervene. Galileo has been in Rome for several months under house arrest. But today, he sits in a prison cell beneath this room. No, he seeks not to recant. He seeks to explain. He desires an audience with the Pope, who does not return the favor. Let me reassure you that my decision tomorrow will be sufficient to satisfy all here. It shall be Rome's final judgment in the case of Galileo Galilei. With this promise of a solution, they all exit the library. Galileo stands in a small, cold, dark cell with only a bed of straw on the floor. In a desperate tone, he pleads aloud to himself, to no one. He's trying to explain his innocence with more examples, experiments, logical arguments. His mind is racing against time, arguing against imaginary opponents. Oh, if only I could have an audience with the Pope. For isn't the Pope one of my allies, admirers, perhaps even a friend? Oh, can't I make you see that I and many others like yourselves came first with devotion to Aristotle and Ptolemy, made our careers upon it, though though in many ways it was gradually proving unsatisfactory. We have not overturned our views lightly. Only through strong evidence and mathematics have we become convinced that the earth moves, that the sun stands still. Let me give you one example. Imagine you're on a ship. The ship sails on the sea. You're in the captain's room below the deck. A glass sits on a table. Is the glass moving? The perception of motion is always relative. Those who say that the earth stands still have many reasons, but each of these reasons have failed the scientific test. You will find the logic and evidence precisely detailed by Copernicus. And with devout consideration for the Holy Bible, I have trusted that one truth cannot contradict another truth. And there were elements of your decree of 1616 that perhaps I did not understand fully. It is the same night at the home of General Del Monte. The guests arrive. The student of Master Galileo, who is now his trusted laboratory assistant. The glassblower from Murano, who is now a famous supplier of lenses. The poet, the artist, they're among the many who've enjoyed a meal and entertainment at the home of Galileo. The ghost of Sagredo, Galileo's dearest friend. The ghost of Paolo Sarpi, Galileo's most influential advocate. The last to arrive is the humanist historian, and now that they're all together, the historian speaks. Enormous danger spreads today like a dark cloud. Our friend and mentor, the Master Galileo, sits in a prison cell in Rome. The final judgment of the Inquisitor can be expected at any moment. If our friend is condemned, then by association we are all guilty in the eyes of the Church. We could all fall under the crushing power of Rome. Giordano Bruno, that Dominican friar of great imagination but little science, was arrested, tortured, and burned by the Inquisitors. Yes, the threat of death to Galileo is great, but death is not the worst that might befall our friend. For Galileo, there is a danger worse than death. With this thought, they draw together and make a plan. It is the next day. We return to the library. For hours, the chief inquisitor has been sitting alone at his desk, ruminating, fuming. For hours, Galileo has been in anguish below in his cell, and he's finally brought into the library. Angrily, the chief inquisitor speaks. The universe is God's creation. The earth stands still. A wheel of perfect crystal spheres hold the lights up in the sky. God made it so. God made it so, Galileo. The Pope, like our Lord, has stepped aside, and I alone am here to deal with you. The Pope is angered by your audacity, and it's most likely our Lord is too. It's not your place to tell the Church what to believe and what to say. We stand on the rock where Peter stood, and on this rock we'll stay. We are not here to listen to your arguments. We are not here to be convinced. You care not what you preach to us of logic or debate. We are here for one purpose, to set the record straight. Do you know you were ordered by decree in 1616 that you may not hold or defend the beliefs Copernican? With lies and logic you try to circumvent. When will you admit your true intent? Would you speak the truth under threat of torture? The scene in the library freezes. We see Galileo's villa on the hills above Florence. In his absence, it is lovingly tended by an old woman and a teenage boy. And yet, there lies Galileo's treasure, his meticulously collected library with both copies and originals of his published works, his correspondence, his mathematical notes, his inventions in progress, his experimental equipment, his catalogs of painstaking observations, his life's work, finished and unfinished, sits unprotected in that villa on a hill above Florence. At the foot of the hill lies a convent. It is no surprise that Galileo lives adjacent to this particular convent, for it's been the home of his two daughters since their youth. His most loving and devoted child, his daughter Virginia, lives there and helps to tend the affairs at the villa during her father's absence in Rome as best she can. Virginia, though locked inside the convent, has a set of keys to the villa. The old woman and the teenage boy have been sent away. Two men arrive at the convent after dark, when most have already gone to bed and blown out their candles. Then, on this moonless night, they ascend the hill. They have two strong horses and two empty wagons. The scene in the library continues. I have not chosen death for you, for death may only make you more famous, a martyr. Instead, I have a better idea. I can make you so small that you disappear. The chief inquisitor now reads the final proclamation. Galileo's dialogue is banned. It and all of his previous works prohibited from republishing. Under threat of torture, Galileo shall be forced to swear an oath which Galileo despises. By this oath, he is obliged to become an informant of the Inquisition. By this oath, he must report and denounce any other suspected heretics to the Holy Office. By this oath, Galileo, friend of many scientists, could become accomplice to their arrest, their torture, their murder. His friends would have much to fear. Galileo shall be under house arrest all the remaining years of his life. The final judgment was complete. The loss of all of his life's work, his published books and correspondence, the loss of all friends and followers, house arrest. No one would be able to come to his aid, and there was no way for him to defend himself. They would make life itself so small and unbearable for him by crushing his spirit and physical health. A man once vivacious and proud, a towering mind of his age, was finally brought low. He would not be martyred. He would just disappear. Galileo explains his relationship to the Pope. Religion itself might have been a mere ruse to distract and deflect. In the end, I believe that the Pope made some calculated moves to protect himself. For under his rule, the papal debt had doubled. Religious battles lost were giving him trouble. Superstitious shenanigans clouded his eyes. Spanish cardinals plotted his demise. And Jesuits argued loudly that they were compromised. It is much safer to be feared than to be loved. Machiavelli, the Pope chose to protect his own political interests. The Pope was angered by my attempts at logical defense. The Pope cast aside my innocence. "5 years have passed. We see Galileo at home, at his villa on the hills above Florence. It is late in the day, and the table is set for 2, for he's expecting a rare visitor. 30-year-old John Milton. Milton is an English man of letters, but he's not yet written Paradise Lost. He's not yet described Satan's shield as the surface of the moon, spotted and imperfect with rivers and mountains. He's not yet described the Archangel Raphael as seeing the heavens clearly, like seeing them through the glass of Galileo. John Milton arrives, and practicing his Italian, he says, "Signore Galilei, it is an honor. Tell me, how are you doing under house arrest?" "It is lonely. I miss my friends. And you are brave to visit me. Please, make yourself comfortable. You're a friend of my son's, is that right?" "Yes, we are friendly acquaintances, and he was kind to suggest that I visit you. And I'm only a little brave, for I feel the power of Rome will not be sufficient to reach me when I return to England. Please, speak to me of whatever you wish. I am grateful to be your audience." This house arrest, it undercuts me in all directions. I still have friends who plead on my behalf, but my case goes nowhere in Rome. I expect no relief. A criminal may be treated with clemency, but I have committed no crime. This war against me has been fought under the lying mask of religion. They feign a theological argument that is thin and weak in the face of scientific evidence. To God I claim my innocence. Some say I am punished for the sin of pride. My discoveries and inventions, my rigorous logic and experiments, I've been trapped by a spider's web of jealousy. Their intent was to destroy every avenue for me, my friends, and my work. But look about you at this room. You see my manuscripts, my published works, my correspondence. My life's work was not destroyed. You see my library of collected works, the foundation of knowledge and inquiry. You see my experimental equipment, meticulously, painstakingly handcrafted. You see my catalogs of observations, a lifetime of effort, the foundation of my discoveries and discoveries yet to come. These are treasures greater to me than the jewels of the Vatican. Had these treasures been destroyed by the bandits of the Inquisitors, it would have been for me a fate worse than death. Instead, they were preserved by the hands of my dearest friends. Not all of my friends have abandoned me. My eyes have suffered. I am now nearly blind. In this darkness, I sometimes consider how I, with my astonishing observations, had enlarged the universe 1,000-fold. This universe is now for me so diminished, it's shrunk to the meager confines of my body. And yet, there is a consolation. I've had time itself and quiet for concentration. With this laboratory and these years, I've completed one more book. A book in which the universe is explained. Of time, distance, acceleration, on how to measure the speed of light, on how to measure the weight of air, on how to gauge the diameters of stars and the distances between celestial bodies. The experiments and the proofs are all there. This, my final book, is called Discourses on Two New Sciences. Uncensored. It has been secretly smuggled to a brave publisher in Holland, where, like a bird, it shall spread its wings freely under an open sky. Would my guest like to step outside and see my telescope? The two men are now standing on the rooftop, a flat parapet where the telescope sits in its frame, pointed toward the sky. Prologue. Humanity seeks to see infinity. John Milton's hand trembles as he touches the base, places his eye upon the piece. Humanity seeks to see the stars. He's afraid he will only be looking into darkness, but instead, he sees stars, more than can be numbered. Humanity seeks to know the truth. Milton now turns the telescope, points it toward the moon, and he sees that, in reality, the moon is no pearl. It has mountains, valleys, craters, light and shadow. A moon that matches Galileo's famous pen and ink drawings published nearly 30 years before. Humanity seeks to feel transcendence. Something magical begins to happen to John Milton, now transfixed, touching Galileo's telescope, gazing at the moon. Humanity seeks to reach the heavens. In his imagination, he loses all sense of his body. And he is lifted up to the surface of the moon, longing to be near heaven, longing to see the heavens clearly. Humanity seeks to see beauty. From this vantage point, he now turns and he glimpses, is it real or imagined, that he sees the exquisite blue and green planet dotted with white clouds. Paradise. Thank you for watching Galileo Revisited.